an architect at Richard Murphy Architects in Edinburgh. The practice's work covers most sectors and has a wide range of projects in the UK, ranging to Malta, Macedonia, and Sri Lanka. Since its inception, the practice has won 28 RIBA or RIAI awards, with Richard also being voted Scottish Architects of the Year 2006 and appearing on the Queen's Honours List in 2007. Richard is also an acknowledged authority on Carlo Scarpa and has spoken extensively on the Italian architect's work. So I'll pass over to Richard for his talk.
Right, thanks very much. What do I have to do? Is that it?
So just the arms.
Okay, well, nice to see you. Nice to be back in Aberdeen. I used to teach here, but I taught here before any of you were born, which is really scary, actually, but just when my office was getting going. So what we're going to do tonight, it's a bit of a sort of scamper, if that's all right. I was trying to work out what, because we've been going for 30 years. In fact, we had our birthday about 3 or 4 weeks ago. And you know, your work gets bigger and bigger, and you think you can't show the lot, obviously, so you have to start making selections. So it's a bit of a curate's egg tonight, and I thought I would start with some very small early stuff, because I like to make the point that the design of a single space is just as important as a major building. And then I thought we'd show I'm very interested in history and how you work with historic buildings or existing buildings, and how you read a site, whether it's in a city or a landscape. So a lot of the projects will be sort of inclined that way. My colleague Bill Black was here about a week ago talking to quite a few of you, and he's slightly stolen my thunder. So he concentrated on what we call the social diagram, you know, the idea of that a plan in particular can engender sociability, whether it's housing or an arts centre or education or whatever have you. So I'm going to slightly kind of avoid that in a way and really more talk about the influence of site and history. And I've got rather too many slides, so I'm going to go very quickly at sometimes. There's a picture of Edinburgh, I'm sure you know that. And I always start by saying, you know, Edinburgh is a very strange place to be an architect, because there aren't any buildings, you know, they're just streets and squares, you know, there aren't collections of buildings really like most cities, certainly in the new town. And it's also at the same time ridiculously conservative. So I don't know why I ended up there. I'm not from Edinburgh. It's a completely disastrous idea, but there I am. So it's been a struggle, I have to tell you, and it continues to be a struggle. It doesn't get any easier. So I'm going to talk about, I'm pressing buttons and nothing's happening. I click the mouse once, okay. Yeah, that's perfect. We did a bit of vanity publishing about 10 years ago, and the book about our office was called Of Its Place and of Its Time, Architecture of Its Place and of Its Time, which sounds like a truism, but what does it mean about of its place? Well, in Scotland, that means, to me, abstract things like light, and the fact that, for example, we're heading into the darkest time of year. And I find it very interesting at this latitude that it's only 6 hours of daylight on December the 21st. And at the opposite end in June, of course, it's virtually light until midnight. And that creates, I think, a lot of interest. Plus the fact that near the Atlantic, we are constantly changing in light. So I'm very interested in how you bring light into a building, but also psychologically, how you deal with winter and summer, particularly with houses. And Aldo van Eyck, the Dutch architect and teacher, talked about a house should be both a bird's nest and a cave. A bird's nest being an extrovert place in the summer and an introvert place in the winter. And the other thing I think is really interesting about Scotland is it's a thick-walled country traditionally. Yeah, and I was just talking to the guys about Udny Castle. That's not Udny Castle, but it could be. And this amazing sort of Lucan, 500 years before Lucan, you know, of served and servant spaces. And I like that. And then when you can work in contrast with that thick walledness is something that is very kind of interesting and exciting. And the modern movement, let's be honest, has not been very good at wintertime, has it? It's all been about glass, you know, and getting rid of what used to be called the poche on the plan, the black bits, yeah. And I was once in trouble with the RIBA Journal because I once said, what's it like to have flu in the Farnsworth house? You know, we don't want to be expensive. And I think Le Corbusier understood that, and certainly our local hero, Mackintosh, understood it. If you go to, well, you can't go anymore because it's burned down, but one day you might go back to the library in the School of Art. And that's a building which I think Mackintosh understood that studying, reading a book is a sort of wintertime activity and nighttime activity. So light fights to get into that space. It's quite interesting. And always the lights are on, even in the middle of summer. And in the marriage bed in Hill House, for example, a little pinprick of light lens up on the bed. I mean, he understood that idea of retreating into yourself. Whereas, what, 15 years later, in Dessau with the Bauhaus, Gropius, it was all about utter transparency and glass everywhere. So I wanted to show you 3 tiny projects, and I'm going to say I think it's tough being a student because you don't get to build things, do you? I assume. Is that right? Yeah, everyone sort of. And yeah, I bet you get sort of things called technical studies, do you? Yeah. And they're a pain in the arse, aren't they? You hate doing them. They're just completely meaningless, and you don't know what you're doing, and you don't have anyone to consult, and you don't have a trade literature library, and you're just pissing around basically and trying to get marks. Is that right? Have I got it right? Yeah, I thought I had. So the trouble is, actually, let me tell you that actually, when you get into the real stuff, that's where the sex appeal is, in my opinion, because I like to make buildings which are over-expressive of how they are made. In other words, one thing generally goes on top of another. And if there's a frame, then you can distinguish that from the walls and things like that. And you make a building over-expressing how it actually is made, which presupposes that you're in control of how it's made, which these days sometimes you're not. But anyway, so I'm going to go incredibly quickly. I'm going to do 3 little house extensions. And the other thing I was telling the guys when we were having a cup of coffee, Peter Smithson once said to his students in first year at the AA, is you're very lucky in your entire career if you have a single original idea. So you can all relax, right? You don't have to be original. And you don't even have to change your ideas from one project to the next. You can just develop the same idea again and again if it's appropriate. So I think that's something which everyone should have a good think about, actually, in the School of Architecture. So here we go. Typical thing you start off with a house extension out the back of a Victorian house. And I like to think of an existing building ruined, which is sort of Scarpa thinking. So you kind of ruin a back extension, and then you put a weird structure on it, and that structure has disappearing corners, which is a very modern movement idea. And you have a big roof to keep the rain off, so you bring light in. I'm very interested in how you manipulate light. This is over 30 years old, but I still like to show it to people because it's a single room, and it's made in a sort of interesting way, which, I mean, the other idea, I mean, talk about ideas, I probably got that idea from Ted Cullinan. He got it from Green and Green. They get it from the Japanese. They got it from the Chinese, that sort of stick-on-stick kind of idea. So you can have it. Disappearing corners, that comes probably from Frank Lloyd Wright, possibly via Rietveld. Here's another one, exactly the same idea, and it turned into that size picture of me as well. But that's got 2 disappearing corners. And again, the frame is distinguished from the panels, which are read as 3-dimensional objects offered up to the ruin of the stonework. So it's all about, it's a single room. And I like to think it gets its sex appeal because of the way it's made, yeah? And the expression of the way it's made. And that isn't a technical study, that's thinking about it from day one as how it's actually made, yeah? So, and you have the disappearing corner, so you have that fun of inside, outside, all that kind of stuff. And I occasionally throw in the odd thing to keep you awake, which is not by me. Who knows where we are on the right-hand side? All the hands go up. Not a single hand. Bad Aberdeen, bad Aberdeen. That's the Sir Johnstone Museum. Does that ring any bells with any of you? Thank you. What, you go to top of the form, mate. That is this wonderful place to visit, which is free. You just have to book in London, in Lincoln's Inn Fields, the House of Sir Johnstone, which is full of the most magical tricks of hidden sources of light, of mirrors, of incredible sections, incredibly complex spaces, and it's a place of pilgrimage for architects all over the world. So next time you're in London, go see it. So anyway, the third one, another house extension, which again is an overexpression of how it's made, okay? And I rather like the idea of how things open and close, as you can see. And this one makes it a little bit further because it goes into a cave mode as opposed to bird's nest mode, with a series of shutters that close down and change the building between winter on the right and summer on the left. Okay, and you've got things, ceilings which move and things like that. So that's that. And a lot of these ideas come from this building, which I studied extensively. And as Christmas is coming, I've got a great book. If you come to the office, you can buy it for £10 cheaper than on the internet, about the Castle Vecchio. And a lot of the things that I learned there is about the idea of relayering a building. And that facade drawing by Scarpa talks about how there's a new layer that slides along behind the ruins of the original facade. And we had a little chance to do that in a Muse building in Edinburgh. And on the right, anyone know what the building is on the right? Maison de Verre by Pierre Chareau and Bernard Bijou in Paris. Does that ring any bells? Right, I hope you're all writing this down, guys. Go and check it out. It's the best house in Europe. It's amazing, absolutely astonishing house built in the 1920s by a guy who actually designed furniture. He wasn't an architect, but it's full of moving parts and things that change. And it's got this revolutionary idea that instead of having windows, it's the walls that give you light. And so they're all made out of glass lenses, as you can see on the right-hand side. Anyhow, I show that because I'm interested in the complete design of a building. So there's a Muse as it was, as it is. You turn it upside down. How you bring light into a building is very important. Getting people in, getting light in is what my professor used to say were the two most important decisions you ever make. So that is that. There's that Muse, which has been relayered. So there's a new layer behind, and you flash the LED panels, as it were, up into shadows or into mirrors. So you give the illusion of a layer of new architecture sliding behind the old. And that to me is a much more interesting way of dealing with an original building than the usual conservation architect approach, which tries to pretend that you're not there. So there's that little thing. And then we have fun inside. There's a mirror there, for example. And it's one of those nice schemes where you're enjoying yourself in 3 dimensions, stuffing things into a sort of 6 by, 5 by 8 footprint, basically. So, and then there's exactly the same idea with the world's first Maggie Centre in Edinburgh, which is a building inside a building. You know what a Maggie Centre is. You've got one in Aberdeen, which I haven't actually seen, actually. They've all gone a bit bonkers since we did ours, actually, to be honest, but no way. Anyhow, I shouldn't have said that, this is being recorded, isn't it? But never mind. So the whole idea of the Maggie Centre, there's no circulation. So it's the opposite of a hospital, because a hospital is almost defined by corridors. And the furniture and the architecture are all one and the same thing. So this was a tiny little project with one space where you can see everything. And then it got extended in both directions at the same time. So it more than doubled in size about 5 years later. And we have a few, it's all about how you make it. Yeah, it's about the frame being distinguished from the timber walls, a disappearing corner, all that kind of stuff. And then it got extended a 3rd time, the yellow bits there. And so we've carried on with the same language of extending the building. So that's our new bit there. So it's all the same language. And again, it's about how it's made. So just make a note of that, because that's really important. And if you like that kind of architecture, I mean, if you're somebody who's a sort of minimalist, like Norman Foster or someone, it's much more about sort of just a skin which covers everything. Or if you're Zaha, then it's a sort of blob. Someone else gets the problem of sorting it all out. But if you like expressing how something is made, over-expressing as I do, then I think that gives you what I call a kind of natural richness to a building, in my opinion. I'd like to be a bit controversial tonight, because architecture is all about choices and values. Okay, it's not just a branch of engineering. So, okay, I'm going to look at 4 houses. Sorry, we're starting off by whizzing over to the west coast of Ireland. There's a typical sort of. And what are we looking at? Dry stone walling, which all the farmers can still do, and sheet metal roofs on the left-hand side. And unfortunately, is there anybody Irish in the audience? Okay, well, I can say the Irish have wrecked Ireland in the last 30 years, actually, and by building hideous bungalows all over the western seaboard, which do exactly the opposite what the traditional houses did on the left-hand side. It's almost like they go for misère. And we had a project to build a family house just behind that tree here, and it's a kind of reasonable sized house, 200 square meters, and you can't do a thatched cottage, nor would you want to. So what do? So you look around. I just look around, and you see dry stone wall, and you see simple forms, you see corrugated metal roofs on barns, and you think, well, that'll do. That's enough. You don't need to do any more. So we had that section with a big space in the middle, and that's what it became. So the idea of the wall is it's supposed to be completely connected to the landscape of garden walls, and then the corrugated aluminium roof floats on top, and there you can see it's sort of linked into all the walls around it. So it's completely embedded in the landscape. A couple of disappearing corners. I did mention that this is now a fetish of mine, which we've inherited from Frank Lloyd Wright and Rietveld. Like that is worth doing, I think. Nice view. And there you go. Where's the join? Can you spot the join? That's the whole point. It's joined into that landscape of dry stone walls, and that's what it's all about. And you have fun. I like having fun, and sometimes doing sort of naughty ideas. And the client was completely bonkers and wanted to have a bath and talk to people in the rest of the house from his bath. So if you look in the bottom left-hand corner, you can see a bathtub actually, and this is a panel which slides away. So you can sit in the bath and talk to people in the living room. The people come in there and they can talk to them in the bath. I thought it was actually a brilliant idea. But anyhow, and then 10 years later, they came back and asked us to do a sort of guest house. So we did, and it's known in the village as the Madonna and Child project, but it's just more of the same. Why not? And it's all meshed into the. I'd like to do a village actually, but it's quite nice. So I think that's a more intelligent way of doing things than plonking down a series of suburban bungalows all over that rather delicate landscape. Well, that's me piloting my microlight. And if you'd invited me up here in the summer, I might have flown, but not this time of year. And I got a job to do a house for a guy who owns an airfield, which you may have seen this. It was on Grand Designs, which is not my idea, it's his idea, at Straven, just south of Glasgow. And it's a blasted heath, and there's nothing there apart from some sort of Nissen huts and hangars and a few trees, but it's a real bleak, high landscape in Lanarkshire. And he wanted to live on the airfield. He was not interested in gardening or anything like that. So for me, it was kind of weird actually, because I'm not used to putting down buildings with nothing around them. So we made a steel house, which is very rational. If you look at this bottom plan here, you can see there's pairs of columns here, and the structure cantilevers out in that way. And he wants to live on the first floor for privacy and have some guest rooms on the ground floor and garage. And so it sort of naturally cantilevers out in both directions like that. And then the section pops up into the roof. Planners wanted a 1.5-story house, the usual rubbish, and so we pushed that envelope a bit. And so they've got his and her studies up there. So that's basically the section, and that's what it looks like. Now, there's a little bit of a debt to Glenmurcutt, obviously, but again, the way it's made is by overlapping planes of corrugated aluminium. When Glenn told me that, I asked him, why do you do the corrugations horizontally? And he says, because it reflects the sky and the ground, which is a very poetic answer, I think. So we did the same, of course. And then we overexpressed the structure and overexpressed how you make the building. And so there it is, end on, side on, halfway around. And you may have seen this on the telly, because I mean, I'm thinking about Grand Designs, it just keeps on coming up, doesn't it? The repeats are, and they go to Australia. I get texts at 4 o'clock in the morning from people in Australia saying, we're seeing, looking at you. Anyway, so there we go. So that's that. That is my means of going to the site, which is rather good fun. I hope you noticed the registration, by the way. That's not me. So that was fun. And then the third house I wanted to show you is completely different. It's sort of very posh suburbia in a place called Dorky, south of Dublin. And Bono lives around the corner. And in fact, I tell you I didn't know who he was. Ray. Shit, I forgot his name now. He appeared in Goodfellas. Who would that be? Ray. He's quite a famous Hollywood actor. He's just rented it for a couple of months. Anyway, so we did a house for a friend of mine who actually lives in Edinburgh but comes from Dublin, and he's a bit of a money man. And he wanted a fancy house. And that was the site, which looks great, but it looks absolutely due north. So there's issues getting light in. And then on top of that, the planners insisted that you should be able to see across the private garden and the house and still see the sea, which was a very peculiar, if I might say so, rather Irish idea. And then the people next door, to my utter astonishment, ripped up their hedge so we could see them and they could see us. I mean, it was a completely Irish thing to do. I had no idea why they did that. So we did a building which turned its back on them, surprise, surprise, and looks at the sea, but basically looks west at the garden. So it goes the long way down, and you'll see what I mean. So there's the site, looking absolutely due north. And there's the building where you come in at the top, and the whole thing sort of steps down. But the section is such That's that's the elevation, not the section. I do beg your pardon, but the bedrooms are downstairs, and the whole thing is basically arranged. There's a guy with his sight line, okay, and then there's the site, and the site sort of diverges away from the sight line, so you get more stuff in here than you do in here. So that's basically the starting point for the entire design, and it's a very sort of multi-leveled house. And this is what it looks like. So there's the view you get more or less from the street across the garage roof, looking at the house itself. So, you know, we tick that box with the plan as you can still see the sea. And that's how you enter. This is the biggest house I've ever built. And that's the main elevation. You can see we're having a lot of fun with panels that step down and all that kind of stuff. And the stone comes from the site, which is quite nice. We just dug it up and rearranged it. And then you enter across the bridge, and then the main production is getting light in through a roof light down this central spine like that. That's the view you get as you come in. And then all the main rooms step down on the top floor. Downstairs, they're all bedrooms, and it's a single space going down from kitchen to dining to living room, what have you. But they're capable of being divided off from each other. And that's a study looking into the living room. And that's, you keep the view back until the best room, which is the living room, and then you get that rather spectacular view at the end. So that was a kind of fun thing to do. And that's the last shot of that, with the master bedroom sits underneath. So that was a nice thing to do. It's quite nice to get a big house to do. And then finally, my own house. I thought I'd show you that house. This is a completely different, this is exactly the opposite. This is squeezing something into a really tight little site in the new town of Edinburgh. That is pre-Newtown. I don't know how much of you know the history of the new town, but there's one street, Broughton Street, which used to be a country lane, which is that red thing there. And that got incorporated into the new town. In fact, you see this village here saying Broughton. We'll come back to that in a minute for a housing scheme. So that is Broughton Street there. And you can see everything else is fairly rectilinear, but apart from that, and that's the site for my house. And it's a cock-up because the two estates that developed simultaneously didn't talk to each other. And these houses should have just carried on and gone around the corner. So you ended up with 4 gables that you shouldn't have seen. Plus in the 60s, this became a hotel and someone smashed a mansard story on the top, which is, in those days, you could do that sort of thing. So you ended up with a gable with an added bodge, right? And this is my site here. So my plan to the planners was to say, we need to build up against this gable. There's a little passageway there to hide it. And they couldn't understand that idea at all. They said, oh, you have to be subservient. You notice this thing? I don't know if you've ever had any dealings with these sort of people, but they always say you've got to be subservient. Why? Why do you have to be subservient? We've never been subservient in the past, you know. Was Christopher Wren subservient to Inigo Jones's Queen's House in Greenwich? Not at all. Thank God, actually. So we didn't do that. That's the mansard as is now, and you can roughly work out what used to be there. So my idea is to continue the facade like that in ashlar, smooth ashlar there, a very pronounced cornice, which then becomes a bookend, like in a bookshelf. And so that's the design as it became. And it deals also with a right of light to the neighbours. It's a squeeze in here, and it deals with privacy distances from the neighbours in the tenement to the left. And it also has a south-facing roof, so it becomes, I'm not terribly eco, but I'm interested in energy as a means for expressive architecture, if you like. So it became a bit of a sort of self-experiment. So there's lots of shutters that close and trap the heat in and then ventilate out in the summer like that. And that's the final section of the house. And you can see the shutters, the main shutters that move, and that's what it looks like. And it took me 10 years from finding the site to moving in, and I'm still not quite finished everything. That's the basement, the spare room. It deals with the slope on the site by having a split section, which becomes an interesting thing in itself. I mean, what this house is about is, in no particular order, putting something contemporary into an historic place, having some interesting ideas about energy, getting a small site and working it really hard to get as much onto it as possible and making the house feel larger than it actually is. And then there's a few moments, architectural moments, where you have heroes and their ideas come into this house. And there's Scarpa, there's Maison de Verre, there's Frank Lloyd Wright, there's Rietveld, you name it, they're all in here. And people say it's over-egged. I say, yes. I mean, you know, I'm not going to do another one. You know, they're going to carry me out, hopefully, in a wooden box. And, so I wanted to get as many ideas into as possible. So there's the main level. You come in, there's a bedroom, you go up a staircase to a study here, that's a garage and utility. And then you come in, there's a library here. And then you come to the living room here, which is a little roof garden here. You come up to a dining and a kitchen, and you sneak up a little staircase here. And what this is about, if you look carefully, it's kind of thick-walled architecture, you see, with things happening within the walls. And I actually think that makes the space bigger. And then you get to the master bedroom in the roof. So there we are, as it works with the existing building. And it's funny, like everybody says, oh, it really fits in, And of course, the neighbors all objected, but they all know I think it's wonderful. And so there it sits in the other direction, and here we go. That famous window, of course, you'll see in a minute, had an effect, because I suddenly realized I didn't have a distant corner. I had to get one. So I wanted one in my bedroom, but I thought I didn't want to have a window looking at me. So I've got a piece of wall that opens up, and behind that is a bath, because I had this idea from the guy in Galway. I thought it'd be quite nice to have a bath and look out, So that's the back, and then I'll take you on a tour. You come in. That's the main room. There's a Sonian bookcase. You've got to go to Soane's museum and see what I'm talking about. Lots of little mirrors and tricks and things. And so there's Venetian stucco lucico from Venice, which is a scarpa material, which has got the color in it. You come up, and then there's a huge mirror. You're looking. This is a mirror, by the way, guys. And so it's an illusion. And then we started playing with the ashlar, and you've got little tiny windows in there. And those windows pop up inside the bookcase inside. There's that mirror again. And then, so it's playing with the idea of cornerstones, but reinterpreting them in a contemporary way. And there's the main space, which is very small. It's only, it's 6, the whole space is 6 by 8 with another 3 meters for the terrace. And the idea again is, I'm a messy cooker, so you can eat there and talk to people down there. So there's the main space in the living room from the kitchen. And there's hidden sources of light going on like that. And that's looking at the kitchen from the living space. So it's quite a complex thing. And yes, there's a sort of Frank Lloyd Wright moment here of Inglenook, if you like. And then the ceiling folds down, as you saw in that diagram. So there's on the right-hand side in winter mode, and all the windows have got shutters of one sort or another. And there's the living, there's the thing coming down. Exactly the same thing happens in the bedroom. It goes up and down, and then there you can see the disappearing corner with the bath. So you can have an alfresco bath. And that's the terrace, which is an homage to Scarpa, because I found these tiles. This is the Queen Stampalia garden in Venice. So I found the people who made them in the early 1960s, and they made me exactly the same one. So, people say it's a copy. I said, no, it's an homage difference. So there's the garden a bit more planted up now. And that kept me sane in lockdown, I can tell you. So that's my house. And, I think, it's tough because in this house, I was just lucky finding a site. I put myself into massive debt to build it, but I don't care actually. I think most architects should build their own house. Yeah, and it's a shame that so many don't. Richard Rogers never has. He's sort of done a sort of Victorian house. He's bashed around, and that's the reason Prince Charles hates him. And I met Prince Charles once at Holyrood Palace for the first time, and I was thrown to the wolves by somebody who said, oh, this is Richard Murphy. He's a very modern architect in Edinburgh. I thought, thanks. And he came up and prodded me on the chest. I bet you don't live in a house you designed. And at the time, I was living in a little mews house, well, the one I just showed you actually, which I rented off my client. And I said, well, actually, I do so. I built this mews house for this lady to rent out, and I liked it so much, I moved in. So, so that was my night had gone up this morning anyway. So anyway, here we are back at the Edinburgh Old. I'm sure you're very familiar with this plan. There's the Old Town, there's the New Town. My house site is just there, okay? But we're going to go into the Old Town, and most of this was chopped off in like a series of fingers knocked off. This is what's called the herringbone pattern. A tiny little very narrow plots with alleyways in between. And we won a competition to do some housing here. And it was such a simple idea. And I think that's the reason that it won. It was just 2 blocks like that. And of course, you've got to deal with light and ventilation, which is the main reason it was all knocked down. So there it is in a very, very dense bit of the Old Town of Edinburgh. And we built it, which is amazing, because a lot of competitions you don't have a building. So basically, we rebuilt a close that had disappeared under a car park, a multi-story car park. And there's some fancy flats on the top. And this is where I used to live, which is called colony housing in Edinburgh, where you get stairs up to flats on the front door. And when I lived there, it was all about this. It was all about sitting out and getting to know your neighbours. And I thought this is an incredibly sociable thing, as opposed to people who lived in that tenement who never knew anybody because all they did was use the staircase as a means of getting to their flat. Yeah, you don't sit out in your staircase. Well, you don't in Edinburgh, maybe you do in Aberdeen, I don't know, but you know, so it's not a way of getting to know people. And I thought that was very interesting. So we won this competition, as I mentioned, for Broughton Village, which used to be surrounded by the new town, and most of it had disappeared, become sort of Victorian industrial buildings. And we basically built on the footprint of the village, but we used external staircases. So it became like a sociable village like that. And then we used exactly the same idea. I was telling guys, you know, you just have to keep an idea going if it's a good idea. On this project here, which is kind of interesting because it's a combination of ideas. This is the old meat traders hotel attached to this arch, which was the old meat market in Glasgow. So the whole thing was B-listed. We couldn't get in here, it was too unsafe. And this bit sort of basically fell down. So we kept up the old door to the hotel and the wall at the bottom here as a memory of this building and rehabilitated these two bits and turned this into a courtyard. And I like the idea of staircases and courtyards working together. So that's what it became as social housing in the East End of Glasgow. Pretty tough part of Glasgow, but it's probably far more glamorous now than it ever was as a hotel. And that courtyard is effectively the common stair taken outside, because to get in, you have to ring the bell, you know, what do you call it? So that became a great meeting place for everybody and became a really social place. And it was a huge rip-roaring success. And it reminded me of this place in Edinburgh, Whitehorse Close, which has been heavily restored now, but it's a wonderful way of living in a city. It's built. And the combination of external staircases and courtyards as getting to know your neighbor and having a sense of identity and also a sense of protection, if you like. So we took that idea, there was our scheme there, and then we took it to a much bigger scheme when we won a master plan for the same client in the Gallowgate, and we were master planning 3 Glasgow architects and ourselves. And you'll notice there's another arch here which is propped up. So we took the idea of the courtyard and we developed it as a courtyard in the middle, which you access via that arch, and then 3 other courtyards here, here, and here. These architects, this was JM, as they turned out to be. They didn't quite get the idea, unfortunately, but this was Patron Park and this was Eldon Cannon and this was us. So we gave them the idea of courtyards. And you know, the Glasgow architects all did tenements because that's what people in Glasgow do, you know, they can't do anything else. So, but we didn't. So there's our scheme through the arch. That's JM on that side, that's Patron Park on that side, and that's ours straight ahead. And then it became like a lich gate into a courtyard. And you can see there were staircases on the outside here, but the main staircases are in the corner like that. And they all visit front doors, and people have places to sit out at the front doors. And the journey to the top floor, which is 3 staircases, becomes a journey. I like staircases that go horizontally as well as vertically. There's nothing more boring than a dog leg staircase, which is what you get in a tenement. Whereas if you turn it into an event by going that way, yep, Alto tells you all about that. You know, his MIT dormitories is that amazing journey up the building. Much more interesting than a dog leg staircase. And some people get a big terrace, some people get a small terrace, but everyone gets something. And we always give people a few props as well. So then we took, I mean, this is, you know, you don't have to be fucking original, right? You've got a good idea, you think it works. I wonder if that will work again. And we went to Belfast with this. Anyone here from Belfast? That's unusual. Usually somebody came from Belfast. And this is the 60s idea of how you house students. This was Queen's University in Belfast, a rather leafy suburbia place, and it all got knocked down because, surprise, surprise, it didn't work. And instead, it got replaced by a sort of, I can only call it sort of bionic housing estate, sort of very big houses for undergraduates who shared flats. And you can see there's a staircase on the outside, and that's it, really. And it works, it's okay, but it doesn't really amount to much more than a sort of large housing estate. But there was a plot here for a postgraduate housing scheme, and there was some buildings which are going to be knocked down. And they said to us, we've got a problem in Belfast. A, we have a bad image around the world because people think of the Troubles. We're still trying to throw that off. B, so we've got to attract postgraduates from abroad. B, when we do attract them, quite often they turn up not knowing English very well. They might only stay here for a year. We need to find some way of integrating them socially and making friends and whatnot. I thought, great, we've just done that in Glasgow. We can apply that to Belfast. So that's exactly what we did. But unfortunately, what student housing is these days, I don't know if anybody lives in some purpose-designed student housing, you get a room and a bathroom, and then someone turns those into 3 flats, which are then organized along a corridor by the fire engineer, basically. And somebody pretends that that's a nice place to live. And that's where you end. This is one I took of one in Warwick, where we're looking at some student housing there, but it could be anywhere in Britain. That is the idea of student housing. And I'm amazed that students don't go mad in a situation like that. So what we did was create a building which there are a lot of mature trees on the site, and we said it's much better to make a garden rather than keep all the trees up. We won that argument. So we went right round the edges of the site, as you can see, very close to the edges, to make a garden. And you enter the building through a pend here. And there's a you go up, the ground goes up the floor from there to there. So this is it. And it's all about the fire engineers. This is the other thing, quite often things like that are really important, but they become quite interesting. So, do you know, a ground floor, first floor, you can escape out of a window. So if you look at that, there's no circulation, there's no corridors. It's all used space. But when you get to the second floor, you can't do that. You've got to have a protected lobby. But if you came in here at the front, you'd have to have a great big long corridor to get you to the back. But if you come in the middle of the plan, then you only have a tiny little protected lobby. Yeah. So there's some logic for taking the stairs up and into the plan, which is what we did in Glasgow, to make that small little lobby, which is exactly the same argument in Glasgow. So that's the plan at the main level, the ground level, and then that's the plan at the very top level. There's 1, 2, 3, and 4 bedroom flats, basically, and some specially designed disabled flats as well. And that's what it looks like. And it's become massively popular, and there's a huge waiting list to get in. And virtually all the bedrooms are on the back, and all the kitchens. And so if you're in this kitchen, you're looking across at this kitchen, and you get to know people, and people sit out in the sunshine, they use the garden. We had to fight to stop the university turning the garden into a car park. And then that's my colleague Simon Robinson from RPP who built it, posing as a student. And I was there about 3 weeks ago. I just took this photographs because the landscape has just completely taken the thing over 7 years. And then finally, again, the same idea for a housing scheme in Westport in the west of Ireland, where we designed a series of interlocking maisonettes and townhouses here with a gun sight view of their famous mountain, which is Croagh-Patrick. That's the section. So I'm going to tell you a funny story about this, actually. So you get a 1.5 height living room and a 1.5 height living room and an external staircase. And this is an internal duplex, as the Americans call it. So that's what it looks like. There's the maisonettes on the right and the townhouses on the left. And there's Croagh-Patrick in the background. And there's the staircase again. So it becomes very sociable. What's the funny story? Well, I was invited to give a lecture at the Westport Festival. They said, oh, would you give a tour of the housing before the lecture? So I said, yes. And of course, we couldn't get into the houses because they're all privately owned. Anyway, there was a guy who lived in this end house here who turned out to be an architect, but he just had a newborn baby. So we saw about 30 people walking around. I said, oh, would you like to come in, you see? I said, sure, just keep quiet, take your shoes off. So we all walked around his house, which was great. And on the way out, I was the last guy out. And I said, well, that was amazing. That was just totally unexpected. And thanks very much. It's just completely made the tour to get inside a house. And he said something that only one architect would say to another. He said, thanks for the section. That was hilarious. Okay, so we're kind of abroad now, going further abroad. Here we are in Sri Lanka. There's the British High Commission, as it was, the British Embassy. There's a man with a gun. There's our site, because we won the competition to build a new British High Commission on that site, but in the middle of a civil war. So it was all about security. But when I turned up to go there in order to do the competition, I went to this place on the left, which is now a restaurant. And it used to be the office of a wonderful architect called Geoffrey Bawa, and that's him sitting there. And it was just a magical restaurant. And I said, well, let's do it like this, beautiful. I mean, can you think of a nicer office to work in? It's almost too nice. Beautiful materials on the ground, lovely reflected light, no air conditioning, just fans, sound of water, inside, outside, intense light, shade here. You go from light to shade to light to shade. And it's just magic, you know. I said, why can't we do a single story British Embassy which opens onto courtyard gardens? So that's basically what we did. And sometimes you just get an idea and you just do it, and it goes through the mill, of course. So that's where the High Commissioner and the top security people are. You come in here, there's a sort of conference room. There's not much Frere Rocher in a British Embassy anymore. You know, the old advert, Frere Rocher. So, Ambassador, you're spoiling us? No, it's not glamorous. It's really an office building with lots of different departments which come and go. So there's no structure inside here. Things can move around. This is the visa. You get a visa entrance here. So I thought, well, when we interviewed for the job, they asked us the obvious question, which I hadn't anticipated, which is saying, what makes your building British? Shit. So I came up with this brilliant solution off the cuff. I said, well, we've been telling the Sri Lankans for 200 years how to build buildings. Now I'm learning from their finest architect. That's the best compliment we could make to Sri Lanka as the former colonial power. And I thought it was a pretty bloody good answer, actually, but it was true. And anyway, we got the job. So it's all about cooling. The section is about passive cooling. Half the year it's humid, but the other half of the year it's not so humid. So you can turn off the air conditioning, which sits here. You can open a flap and open the walls, and this heats up and it pulls the air across pools in courtyards. So that's basically the idea. And that became the leitmotif of the entire building. That's the visa entrance. That's the main entrance. There's a wall, a window in to see what's going on. There's lots of water in there. That's the main courtyard as you turn up in your limo to see the ambassador. That's a couple of ladies we borrowed from our Sri Lankan office. Just some photographs. That's the main entrance. That's the way to the ambassador's house, which already existed. That's the way to the consul, and on the right-hand side, the ramp to the visa. There's a garden. We said to the landscape architects we wanted every garden to be different, and we wanted the sound of water to be different in each courtyard, which I thought was quite a nice idea. There's somebody who's got the windows open, and you can see they've got the flaps open there as well. So there's someone working in the garden. So that comes from that experience of going to that restaurant. That's all it is. And there's the ambassador's office. He can't open his windows for security reasons, and he's got a big pond outside. We used to joke with the workers that we're going to put piranhas in there as a security measure. They actually sort of believed us. Actually, it's quite funny. Anyway, there's the main spine down the middle of the building with obviously apologies to Lou Khan and the Kimball Gallery, reflected light up onto the concrete. There's the pool. And a little bit of touch of Barragan, who's wandered in there, not quite sure why, but never mind. There's the architect having a dip. And there's children looking into the friendly British High Commission. It's the only one you can look into. Everyone else is basically a fortress. Now, another foreign place. Now, apart from the three guys I was talking to earlier on, does anybody know where this is? This is not far from here, actually. Actually, that's not true. It's about 250 miles from here, maybe. Anyone got any guesses, guys? Anyone a bit of a geography whiz here? We're in the North Atlantic somewhere, but it's not British. Anyone still awake? Okay, I give up. This is the Pharaoh Islands, which, in case you didn't know, are about halfway between Scotland and Iceland, and they're a sort of semi-autonomous bit of Denmark. But I first went there with a bicycle about 35 years ago and completely fell in love with the place. And then there was a competition on to go for a church. So I thought, oh, wow. And it's a pretty spectacular landscape, right? It's amazing, actually. And they have their own architecture as well, which is rather fun. And it's quite prosperous as well. They've got control over their fish. They're not in the EU. But the site was a bit boring, actually, because it was next to a suburban development on one side, with a little stream and a sort of nature reserve on the other side, just south of the main town, Tórshavn. And I was terrified of doing a church. I've never done a church in my life, and I was thinking about churches. And I came across this church by Alto in Italy. It's the only thing he's ever done, apart from the finished pavilion, the Biennale. And it's basically the section of the plan converge in a brilliant way. It's just one section which gets smaller on the plan, and that makes the volume, and it's brilliant. And I thought that's a really clever idea. And I thought, oh, if we could adapt that. That's the inside of his church in Riola, in the Apennines in Italy. And that's our site. There's the suburban stuff, and there's the sort of the lake, stream, whatnot. This is a sort of nature reserve, and over there is the sea. And so we did a church and all the parish rooms as well. So there's the plan with apologies to Alto. I think you can probably see a bit of that, but why not? You come in, obviously, here in the middle, but you also come in from the path down the nature reserve, and these are just parish rooms and things, and this is obviously the church here. So then there's a dramatic section using glue lamp beams again, and then this is what it looks like. It's the elevation. It becomes a Janus building. It has completely two different personalities. That's the elevation to the suburban housing, but that's the elevation to the nature reserve. So you're obviously trying to sort of not be there up to a point. And so that's the elevation to the housing. That's the elevation to the other side. And that's the view of the church. We're interested in actually getting light in, sunlight in, and they also had a carefully organized window so you could see the sea behind the altar. So that was fun. We didn't win, but nothing got built. So I was saying to the students earlier on, so never throw an idea away, store it away, okay? Now, I'm going to finish by doing a whole series of arts buildings. And I thought I'd start with this rather amusing poster, which Saatchi and Saatchi came up with for the V&A in the 80s, in the time of Thatcher. And they said, they basically said, what is it like? What was their strap line? Oh God, I've forgotten now. Ace Calf with museum attached was how they described the V&A, right? Which all the sort of cultural people in the art world were absolutely horrified at. They thought it was a complete dumbing down of a great national institution. But actually they spotted something that, I mean, when I was a kid, my dad might take me to an exhibition in Stockport, and if there was time on the way out, we'd have a cup of tea. Now with art centres, you go to the place for the cup of tea, and if you have time, you go to the exhibition. Otherwise, it's become places to meet, which is great, and far more people see things. So the first time we had to go was the Fruit Market Gallery, which we put the cafe on the street. I won't go there now. It's been sort of partially destroyed. And DCA in Dundee, you may know it, where we put the cafe in the middle of the building, and that's been a rip-roaring success. It's a huge, it's described as the living room of Dundee. It's quite an interesting idea. And then we did it again with Peebles, where we took the side of a church off and turned that into a cafe on the street, and that becomes the heart of the building, and it's now the heart of Peebles, actually, like that. So we constantly think the most important thing in an arts building is where you put the cafe and the bar, because without it, it won't work properly. And I do passionately believe that. And there's actually examples, which I won't mention tonight, of other architects in Scotland who've not done that, and their art centres struggle. And the other idea is, if you're doing a theatre, to have that old idea of expressing the auditorium inside the plan. Well, obviously, this is the ideal city. We all know that that is the public building as opposed to the general buildings to either side. And it was done by Palladio, where he did, in his Olympic Theatre in Vicenza, where you arrive here and you know where the auditorium is, because you can see the back side of it, as it were, sort of invading this room. Alto did it in a very early job in Uvascular, where he made a workers' theatre, but he cheated. He wanted you in the foyer to know that this was the auditorium, so he made it like that. But actually, when you go in, it's more or less a straight auditorium, but it's a cheat. But we did the same thing inside an art centre in Carnarvon in North Wales, where we wanted people, we couldn't do a curved auditorium because it had to be pack-away seating. And so we made this curved, what appeared to be the back of the auditorium in the foyer, so everybody knows where the main auditorium is. But I do that, and leading up to this project, which I think you had on your poster, so I said I'd better show you this. This is old industrial sheds in the middle of Galway University in the west of Ireland. And I think there's 1, 2, 3 sheds. But again, it was a centre for performing arts and a little theatre, but we made the theatre be like a circular building inside the building. And it also was a rather useful device for getting you from, they wanted an entrance here and they wanted an entrance here, and a long sort of strung out foyer, but it makes that corner work as well. And the rest of the rooms are just rooms of practice rooms and things, but that's the main production. So that's what we did, and we cut holes in, just like Scarborough would have done, quite brutally sometimes, to get things in. There you can see on the left-hand side is the auditorium, and there's the rest of the foyer. So it sort of is this object which sits inside the repetitive roofs of the old sheds, and then occasionally you draw people's attentions to some of the historic detail, which is again a trick we learned from Scarpa. and then you use the curve in an interesting way to get up to the seats. And then you might say, well, how do you put a curve? How do you put a cylindrical building into a an old shed? Surely they smash into each other, don't they? It doesn't work. You can't do that. So where my mouse is here is our old friend the mirror. Okay. So when you're standing here, it looks like the roof is carrying on over the top, but actually behind that is the auditorium. So it's a trick, right? It's a trick. My old boss, Richard McCormack, used to say, oh, we mustn't miss a trick, and I like that. There are tricks in architecture, So again, it's another idea of the building inside a building, which you saw at the beginning. So there you are, and how you do buildings inside a building is actually all to do with the join. If you make the join in the shadows, then you don't know that it's actually joining. It really does appear like a building. So then, a bit closer to home in Dunfermline, this is the world's first Andrew Carnegie library, who came from Dunfermline, and he donated 2,500 libraries before he died. He was the sort of Bill Gates of the 19th century, and great philanthropist. And we got the job to put a new building on the side of this, and that was how the Fife Council thought about. This is quite interesting, isn't it? This is how in the 90s you extended a historic building. You sort of mimicked it, yeah? It's crap, isn't it? I mean, really, that's the end of architecture if we're going to go there, I'm afraid. Sorry, guys. Yes? It's the easy thing to do, but it's crap, isn't it? So don't ever do anything like that. Can you all raise your hands and say, I promise, Richard, never, ever, ever to do anything like that, okay? Because that is insulting history. That's like putting fake pictures into the National Gallery, right? I mean, you just don't do it, right? So, but it's much more, what do you do? It's much more difficult. Well, there was a competition when the RAS used to run proper competitions, and there were some wonderful buildings in Dunfermline, the Abbot's House, it's half an abbey. This bit fell down as a 19th century parish church, but that is a wonderful version of Durham Cathedral and a fantastically romantic old town hall here. So this is our building here, and that's the library. And we wanted to bring these buildings into the experience of the museum, obviously. There's the town hall, amazing, like something in Prague. There's the Abbot's House, rather nice Christmas card. There is the Half Abbey and the parish church. And the Abbey is amazing. It's basically a scaled down Durham Cathedral. It's fantastic. There's our site at the back of the library with some scraggy trees, and that's the graveyard, and there's a boundary wall. And the client didn't own the garden, it was a car park. So everybody had real problems getting in because this is a listed old bank, and that's listed, and the boundary of the site was here. So how'd you get in? And people had lots of crazy ideas. We had the craziest of all. We had the idea that we were going to hinge the facade, right? So in the morning, half the facade hinged open and you went into our building. And at night, you got your listed building back again, right? I have to say, this was an idea which was too adventurous for our friends at Historic Scotland, and they just couldn't get their head around it at all. And they put their foot down, and the whole project wobbled. And this was after we'd won the competition. And luckily, the council then came to our rescue and bought that car park. So we were able to turn that into a garden and come in there instead. That was our competition scheme, to make a street and a journey to the roof on which you visited everything. This is the built project. There's a little memory of that big hinged facade, so we made an enormously heavy hinged gate instead. It's just a little architectural joke. But instead of coming in here now, you come in here, and this becomes the entrance, and this is a garden, which is a nice thing to have anyway. So there's the plan. That's where we were looking in here. You made a little indent here. That's the actual entrance now. You come in, but the point is, it's all organized on a series of parallel zones, okay, like a tartan grid, except there's much going that way, but it's all that way. So there's a narrow, wide, narrow, slightly wider, narrow, wide, and then it works in with the 1990s building there. So this is a top-lit street, and this is the journey that you go round, and then you go over the street and go back on the other side, and there's a series of bridges. So I'll quickly whiz you through that. There's the first floor with a cafe and a library. Keep going up, and then you get to a two-story museum and top-lit galleries there and side-lit gallery there. And then the thing goes back, and you plug in these two rooms from the library, which are part of the art centre rather than the library now. And there's some meeting rooms. That's basically it. And that's the section through there. There's the There's the museum, which is like a sort of casket with a barrel roof. And you can see the zone chair. There's the top-lit street, and that's a picture through the galleries. And there's I managed to do an alto step section library here. You know, the alto one. In fact, I think I got a picture of the one in, what's it called? The town which is now in Viborg, it was when it's Russian, Viipuri, when it was finished. So there's the entrance, and we're having fun again with the idea of sliding things behind the history. This used to be rubble, and we took it all away, and we put Court End there instead, but it slides in behind, just like Scarpa's Castle Vecchio, or like those little muse houses or Maggie's Centre and whatnot, but at a much bigger scale. And you're very careful, you've got to select the buildings you want to see, so you frame them on the journey. There it is under construction. You can see it's quite a tight site. And there is the final facade, where there's a stone wall which is sort of cut into in order to see the next layer behind. Has anyone been there? Oh, well, yeah. You go to the top of the form, definitely. There's Alto's Viipuri Library. You know, that lovely thing where a desk turns into the top of a bookcase and you can keep doing the cascade. He did it in Oregon. He did it in the centre of Helsinki as well. So we did it in Helsinki, Dunfermline, where the top of the desk turns into, so there's a half-height thing. It's a little step section like that. And then that's the view you get from it of the library, of the abbey. There's the cafe terrace. There's a medieval garden at the back of the abbot's house. So we just carried it on. We didn't have any money for a landscape architect, so we did it ourselves. So we made a it's grown up now. It looks a lot better now. There's a little maze and whatnot. So it's a continuation of the medieval garden, basically. And that's the street. That's the top lit street, which is kind of busy and kind of photogenic too, actually. That's the view. People from Dunfermline spend a long time looking out the window. I think it's quite interesting, actually. They put a settee there now. People sit and just look out. It's great. Fantastic. And then on this side is a steel staircase as opposed to all the others, because that's actually internal to the museum. You sort of pop out of the museum and go back in again, but you don't connect to the main circulation system. There's the top lit galleries, which can be one or two galleries. These are great big pivoting walls here. And then the other gallery sits here above the library here. And that is, it's like a Macintosh hen run, if you like, to get to it. And then that becomes that. And you've got a screen which can close this off, so you can have varying degrees of the view of the abbey. And in the museum, there's big spaces, little spaces. And then it's quite nice. They picked up the idea of bringing these buildings into the museum. They've even put a little piece of information about the abbot's house as if it is an exhibit in the museum, which is exactly what we wanted them to do. And then we again relate to the guys in the sculptures in the garden, these guys. And then what the hell is that doing? I don't know what it's doing there. Anyway, there's a little window. Does anyone know where this is? It's a wonderful building by Scarpa in a place called Possagno, the extension to the, you're going to have to ask me back to do my Scarpa talk, to the sculpture gallery for Canova in Italy. And it's a magnificent three-dimensional window up in the top. Well, we couldn't do glass roof. We tried hard, but we weren't allowed to do it. So it went on its holidays and got a bit bigger and ended up in Dunfermline as the culmination of the museum. Okay, so that's what you do. No such thing. And you walk along the side zone and you end up in this amazing place where you can see the whole of Dunfermline, the abbey, across the Forth. It's a major sort of panoramic place. And that's the view from the graveyard. Now, this is a conservation area. Whoops, sorry. I think it helps having an architectural competition because everyone sort of all the usual blue meanies take a step back. But I kept on arguing with them. I said, you've got things here from the 13th century, the 16th century, the 19th century. History is something that continues. Yes, that's what William Morris taught us, that it carries on. It's not stopped. And so this is someone else's history. I like to think that what we are doing now is creating listed buildings for our grandchildren. Okay, very important there. You've got just as much right to do it as people in the past have. So that's the building. And then the other one, which was sort of going on roughly along the same time, was this one in Perth, which we won. It was an absolute guddle of a theatre with a horrible 1990s extension out the back. But the only way to get in was this upper flight of stairs, and then I won't bore you with the circulation inside, but it was a real ball of wool job, you know. And there's a little alleyway down the side, and at the back it's really horrible. And so it was a historic auditorium. We didn't have money to knock down the stuff at the back here, which is mostly actors' accommodation. So what we did do was knock all this down completely. That's the way in there. There's the historic auditorium, and there's the 1990s building at the back. And that's what it became. And the main entrance now is from Mill Street. We failed. We tried to buy a cupboard off Holland and Barrett here in order to knock that staircase down, and so you could actually walk through at level, but we failed after several attempts. So you have to come up the stairs, and you come up the stairs here the old way, and then you have to go back down again, which is a real piss, but that's life. And then there's a new studio auditorium there, and then this is a very complex series of levels, and so the foyer here has to deal with it. But the point is, the foyer, the biggest problem with these sort of theatres is total disorientation. You've no idea where you are and how to find your seats and all that kind of stuff. Now there's a foyer, and you stand in the foyer, you can see everything. The geography of the building is absolutely crystal clear. And at the top of the auditorium, top of the auditorium there, and then some studios there and various other things. And we fiddled around with this building as much as we could. So that's it during the demolitions. I like knocking things down, it's great fun. And we wanted to show people the history of the building, we wanted to reveal what had gone on. So we kept all that. We didn't plaster the wall or repair it or anything like that. And also then we enhanced it by top light. A hidden source of light is always a great thing to do. So that was that. So people see the old building in the foyer. So they know what's new, they know what's old, they know where the auditorium is. It's all very obvious, right? And there's bits inside you see through to what's going on behind, which is kind of fun. And there's the foyer. So from there, you can just basically see everything. You can see how to get everywhere, see the bar, the restaurant, the toilets, the auditorium, the studios, everything. So it's all very obvious. And there's the studios at the top, and the bar and the restaurant. And there's the auditorium. And we brought back into play the top circle, which had been closed for fire regulations. So we brought that back in. And the way we did that was to sneak a fire exit that cantilevers down over the little alleyway at the side. And there's the studio theatre. And there's what you used to see, this crappy building put on the back, which was bizarre, actually. And now we didn't have the money to knock it down, so we reclothed it. That's it now. It's quite fun, isn't it? So that's what I expect. And then we put the green room here quite deliberately. The other problem is you have to get all the lorries in here and the people in here. So normally, you know, usually a theatre's got a back and a front. We didn't have that. We only had one side to deal with. So we had to cunningly disguise all the stage door on a wall here. So lorries back in and people come in here. But that is the green room, because we thought it'd be fun. If you've got someone really famous, you know, and they're sitting, hanging out in the green room, you can look up and say, oh, it's Brad Pitt, or I'm not sure Brad Pitt would come to Perth, but you know what I mean. Anyway, so there we can see some actors sitting in the green room there. Thought it'd be a fun thing to do. So that's Perth. And while we're in Perth, I thought we haven't won every competition we've done. In fact, I'd say we've lost more than we've won, let's be honest. This was one we should have won, but it's round the corner, Perth City Hall, which was, at one point they were going to knock it down. Now they're going to turn it into an art gallery museum. And as usual, it's a sort of, these sort of buildings are mausoleums. You can't see what's going on. There's no windows. They're just completely blank, because it was a concert hall. And there was quite a nice little shopping street on sort of cafe street here. But this is a horrible shopping centre. This is nothing. And this is a church. And it sits as a complete object building in Perth. And there's a huge amount of resistance to knocking it down, as you can imagine. There's the cafe street. And so there's the inside of it as a concert hall. It's just basically one big volume. So what do you do? How do you turn that into a museum? Well, we decided it'd be quite fun to make a series of cabinets within that volume and build up. So you had a series of rooms which could be changed, and the routes could be changed, and a whole variety of things could go on inside that as it built up like that. And so there were 4-story high cabinets with streets done Dunfermline style between the cabinets. And then we wanted to, just like we'd done in Peebles, was to take the whole side of the building away. so that when you're in this street with the cafes, you could look right through the building, through these windows here, and it became, as it were, part of the city network of streets. So there's the idea. There's the sort of cabinets, and there's the hall, and you look right the way through. So there's within the building, within these cabinets we made, and then there's the idea of removing that entire piece of wall, and then looking in and seeing these cabinets, and then also looking right through the building to the other side. So it became like a integrated piece of the city, so that the museum was the exact opposite of the sort of mausoleum. It was something that was alive in the city, even when it was closed. And somebody won the competition and just kept it, basically. Kept the mausoleum. Dickheads. Anyway, never mind. And then this is in Dublin. This is kind of fun. This is not an arts building. I'm sorry, I've got this slightly out. It's for Trinity College, but they're turning it into a sort of groovy IT place where people have groovy IT ideas. How am I doing for time, by the way? Perfect. I think I'm going to make it, actually. And this is a shed. This is another shed. This is a tower. These are all, this is listed. This is the Docklands, and this whole block is owned by Trinity College, and it's become, and Google and Facebook and all these people are around there, and it's full of hipsters, and it's all groovy stuff. And this is a shed they bought, so that site has got bigger. So there's the sheds, two of them. There's the tower. It's not very nice. It's not very interesting, to be honest. There's the side of one of the sheds. It's kind of weird, actually. We're used to having brick buildings with stone surrounds. They've got stone buildings with brick surrounds. Very, very Irish. Anyhow, there's the inside. It used to be a drinks warehouse. This is what we're doing with it. We're making a cafe and a sort of exhibition space here. That's one shed. That's the other shed, which we're full of computer desks at 1, 2, 4, and 6 groups, and some of them are sort of subdivided and whatnot. And then we're doing something on the ground floor here. We were doing a walkway, but that's been cut, and we're landscaping between the two. So that's it. So that's what it's going to look like. We've cunningly taken that building away so you can see the whole thing. And it's about, they wanted sort of telephone rooms and meeting rooms and things like that, as well as open plan space. So we turned those into sort of silos of towers, which also allows to get light down to the lower levels. So those are the silos, and the light also comes down there to the lower levels. And then we're slicing circulation across between the sheds. So that's what it's going to become. And that's the main floor. You come in on baking mezzanine, which look a bit like our office. And then down there is the light, and there's another set of desks underneath. So that's it. That should be on site very soon. That's occupying 3 people in the office at the moment. There's the lower levels. And then the next project is sort of in planner land at the moment, and I'm hoping it's going to be out of planner land by Christmas and we can resubmit the planning application. This is the wonderfully named Festival Square, which is the only place in Edinburgh which is not used in the festival because it's totally dreary and miserable. My friend Murray Gregor calls it Ceausescu Plaza. You know, it's got 3 really, really boring buildings, and nobody uses the square because it's not on the way to anywhere, and there's nothing happening at the ground floor. There's one pub here, no, there's 2 pubs here, and a little bit of activity happens here, and that's it. You know, it's a classic example of people who don't understand how to do urban design. So we came up with the idea to put a new film house here, and that's the plan of the film house, and to completely re-landscape the square. That's the ground floor, which is, as you'd expect, sort of cafes and things like that. And it's an object building sitting in the square, slightly asymmetrical, so the entrance to the Sheraton Hotel is still very obvious, completely re-landscaping the entire square. And what happens is most of the film house happens underground. We're going to take away the entire square, and these are 6 auditorium underground and a little tower above with a single auditorium, as you'll see in a minute, above ground. So that's what it's going to look like, I hope. We're going to do illuminated panels like in Perth, but this is Edinburgh, we have to do it much sort of quieter and light levels and that kind of stuff, right opposite the Usher Hall. The entrance is on the axis of the Usher Hall. There is a plan eventually to sort of traffic calm to make it one big square, which would be great, but I don't think I'll see it in my lifetime. So there we are, looking back across towards the Usher Hall, and there's the auditorium plan underneath. There is the -1 cafe plan, which spreads out, and there are light wells on either side. So you're connected at -1 level to the street up above, as you can see, and those light wells go down, and you go from there down half a level and into the auditorium. So it's all connected. I don't know if you know DCA, we had exactly the same idea. There should be a seamless route from the cafe to the auditorium. And that's as you come out of the Usher Hall. And then we've got, again, from DCA, I don't know if you know, there's a panel at DCA which slides, and it broke once, so they just never used it again, which is so frustrating. You give clients toys and they just don't use them, you know. But we had this idea that at the time you could see the Tay. They've sort of built a multi-story car park in front there, which is a piss of it. But the idea was that you'd start every film with a view of the Tay, and then you go to wherever you went to in the film, and you end up, and as you're sitting there watching the credits, the thing rolls back and you see the Tay again. We've got exactly the same idea here, but this is going to be used as a prestigious lecture hall auditorium to show. We've got a screen that slides across in front of a window, and from that window, you will see the castle and the Usher Hall. There you are, and you have lectures there. You can clear the seats away for dinners and things like that. So that becomes the prestigious event. That's the section. So it's quite a complicated building, actually. There's that lecture theatre up there, the 7th auditorium. And that is the offices for the film house. And then there's a restaurant on the roof. And then something I've battled, I think I won, is to get a rooftop terrace bar and somewhere you can watch cinema on a summer's evening. So you can have open air cinema above the lights of Edinburgh, which I think will be a bit of a whiz thing to do. And I think it's the thing that's going to go around the world about this building, is watching cinema on the rooftops of Edinburgh. I think would be great. Edinburgh's beginning to discover its rooftops. We did a cafe, which is sort of a restaurant which has been sort of destroyed. It used to be called Oloroso. It's now full of Thai elephants and things. It's horrible. But Johnny Walker's have just done one. Harvey Nicks have done one. And of course, Edinburgh's so topographical, it makes so much sense. So there's a view from Cambridge Street, and there is the view from the roof of the Usher Hall. So that's kind of exciting. I'm not sure if I'll live to see it, because I think it'll take them about 50 million years to raise the money, but you never know. I thought I'd quickly show you something that nobody's ever seen. This hotel came into prominence for the G7 summit, because believe it or not, President Biden and various people stayed there. And it was billed as a sort of luxury country house hotel in St. Ives in Cornwall. It's crap. No, I shouldn't say I was recording this thing. It's a sort of 3-star hotel. It's not that luxury at all. I was amazed that they chose it as the centre of the G7. Anyhow, they wanted to do knock down a wing here and do lots of self-catering units. So I thought I'd show you what we did. There's the plan of the hotel. The hotel's sort of here, and there's the front of the hotel. It used to be a railway hotel for the Great Western. That bit is coming down anyway. It's falling down actually. And that's the view to the north of the sea. That's St. Ives in the distance there. It's a beautiful part of the world, as you may know it. Right at the other end of the country. That's our sort of site there. There's the hotel, that's the bit that's coming down. So we have this thing, how do you do self-catering there? And we came up with the idea of 2 different models. A single story, one, a living room and bathrooms and bedrooms lit above, and a 3-story tower where you come in at the middle floor, you go down a stair to a bedroom underneath, where you go up a stair to a sort of living room, dining room, kitchen thing, and a balcony. So that was the idea, and you intersperse them. So this was the plan going down the hill, and it became like a sort of hobbit village. So that's it there, going down terraces. And the thing is, you read the towers, but not the flat ones in between. So it's a sort of Dogon village of self-catering units like that. It's kind of paused at the moment. I'm not sure what that means. It's dead, but it's paused. They got so excited about the G7, they haven't quite recovered yet. And so that's it. I thought it was rather fun. I think it could be amazing, actually. And obviously the landscape is incredibly important, but in that part of the world, things grow. It's really lush, you know. It's amazing. It's sort of almost subtropical down there, and you go down. It's fantastic. And we've got one more. We've got one coloured CGI, so you can get the idea of the sort of Dogon village comes to St. Ives. That was kind of a fun thing to do. Here's a job they didn't win. St. Andrews, do you know St. Andrews? Been there? Yep. It's very, very clear urban design. It's full of rigs. We had a music centre where they had students arriving from one side, but the public arriving from another. So with an auditorium in the middle. And we thought it's very important to make a very small footprint and to make a very north-south building. So that's what we did. The students come in here, the public come in here. There's a foyer, there's an auditorium, there are various practice rooms, there are rehearsal rooms here and here, and there's some rehearsal rooms on the roof. And it's a very long, thin building in that tradition of rigs. And that's what it looked like. There's the public entrance at this end. This is the foyer opening onto a garden. That's the public entrance there. There's the auditorium. Now, we weren't getting paid for this competition, bastards. And there's a foyer. And we stole the idea for the foyer, for a beautiful foyer that Burrell Foley Fisher did for the menu in Faultless, absolutely beautiful. It's exactly the same size, so we want to do one like that. So that's the view looking out to the garden where all the circulation is expressed again, because I like expressing things. And that was it. We didn't win, and that's what did win. I went there the other day and took those photographs. No, that's the public entrance. Sorry, guys. This is one we didn't win either. This is the concert hall behind the bank, which was my idea for the site. I took it, you know, the Bank of Scotland, the Royal Bank, sorry, was a house, then it became a bank, and our idea was it became a concert hall at the back. And basically, that's it. We had a large hall and a small hall, and that was the plan. You come through the house, you go through the great banking hall, you keep on going, there's a foyer, you climb up a staircase to a roof terrace, and on the way you visit the concert halls. And eventually get up to the roof of Edinburgh. And what had been an impenetrable urban block suddenly became very non-penetrable, if you like, with these routes through to make it a daytime building. And we made the front like that, and the auditorium like that, and that was the banking hall, and then that's what happens instead. But then after Chipperfield won the competition, well, before Chipperfield won the competition, the bank said, oh, we're not really very interested in this. And so everyone's going to have now come in around the corner and whatnot. So it's a bit of a disaster. This is Venice, and this doesn't happen now, they've just banned these, but these are the sizes of these cruise liners. Well, they're absolutely amazing. I rather enjoy being in Venice and watching these things float past, but anyway, you won't see that anymore. But they come to Greenock instead. And we got this crazy job to put three things together. Yes, Venice to Greenock, you don't make that connection very often. And we've got a cruise liner terminal which processes 5,000 people as they come and go off a boat. They just stay for 24 hours usually, and they get on buses and go to Edinburgh Castle and things. And then a gallery for George Wiley, who comes from down the road, and then a cafe, Scott's Cafe. So there's the famous boat by George Wiley. There's Scott's Cafe in South Queensferry. They're now all over the west coast of Scotland. That's our site, and that's a bleak site next to a bleak cinema. And so this is what we're doing. Those are the three bits of the site. The pink is the George Wiley, the blue is the cruise liner, the green is the cafe, and the yellow is a sort of neutral foyer between the two. So that's the plan on the site. That's the bits. That's the George. You come in here, there's a sort of foyer, you make a courtyard, and it faces out towards the view. And Scott's restaurant sits on the top, looking out at the view like that. So it's been fun having three different clients in one building. That's what it looks like, it's going to look like. And that's from the seaside. So that's quickly. And then the final job, which has been in the news, so I might as well show it you, it's very quickly. This is the famous Royal High School by Thomas Hamilton in the 1820s, one of the most important neoclassical buildings in the world, which has lain pretty unused, stroke derelict for the last 50 years. And that's his painting of it. And it's very significant the way he painted it. It was his drawing he submitted for the membership of the Royal Scottish Academy. And you'll notice he cuts off the side of the building quite deliberately so you can't see the windows, because Greek temples didn't have windows, correct? Obviously. And so there are no windows here at all. I don't know if you noticed that. And the buildings around here get top light. It's only at the sides you see the windows. And funnily enough, this was in a very complicated way of getting out. This door was open once a year when the senior students would process out. The girls would go one day, the boys would go, they'd come down a series of staircases, and eventually they'd pop out here, and they went off to run the British Empire, because that's what they specialized in doing. So that happened for like 150 years until the school moved. And that's David Roberts is collaborated with Hamilton to make this perspective. But you notice also that the windows are just these lodges, and they block out the windows here. You still don't see any windows at all because it's a neoclassical building. So it's a really intriguing project, and we came up with an idea which is quite revolutionary, is to reverse this fantastic series of staircases and to make a foyer under the main hall, which is going to become a music hall, and it's going to become a music school, which is currently St Mary's at the West End. And that's the main plan at the lower level. That's the foyer. These stairs, there's landscaping. there's administration, there's a refectory, and then away through here, these are bedrooms here around courtyards. And then these are massive series of practice rooms here, one-to-one teaching, and these are classrooms which disappear under gardens here. And then here is the auditorium, and here is two other smaller performance spaces. And the key thing here is keeping the public and the school kids on different territories. So the school kids come in here and the public comes in here, and the two don't meet, because that's quite a sensitive issue, of course. So that's an interesting project, and it's been sitting lying fallow while hoteliers tried to get planning permission for a hotel and failed, and that took about 10 years. So we suddenly come back to life. So it's now cranking up in the office, and we're even taking some people on, actually, which is good news. There's the classrooms, there's the bedrooms. As you can see, they're all sort of planted roofs, so they disappear. When you look down from Carlton Hill, you just see greenery. There is a bit more of the view of the new stuff. And then there is our new entrance, terribly controversial, but the important thing, it's not seen from the street, it's slipped in behind this wall. So you still come up Thomas Hamilton's stairs, and then you come in underneath here. And then you go into, this is the only major space we're making really, which is a new foyer. And we're hoping to get a glass strip into behind the pediment, so you get a hidden source of light coming in there. And that will be the foyer. And then from there, you go up on either side on these staircases, and then into the concert halls here, here, and here. And that's the final slide. So that shows it all up from there, and you can see how it all works. We don't know still, because we haven't been able to get into the building until recently, and we don't know how much rock we're going to have to take away. We're hoping not much, but it's a bit of a sort of, it's a bit scary actually. And there's the glass roof with the light which comes through the pediment. The other thing is when you come in, you'll suddenly get the shock of your life, because you'll have this massive vertical space, and you'll look up and see the underside of the pediment, which again is a trick from Scarpa. You do things to make people look at the history that they might have otherwise never seen. So that's what we're doing at the moment, actually. We've got another job which I haven't shown you, but there's 3 main jobs in the office, and that's now very much one of them. So there's a little canter through bits of my life over the last 30 years. I hope it's made a sort of thread. I hope you've picked up a few nuggets, maybe a few buildings to go and look at, not necessarily mine, but and good luck, guys, when you all grow up. I hope you all get nice jobs and become famous architects and enjoy yourselves. So I think, have I done it in the time? Brilliant. Okay, I was a bit worried I was going to go on a bit, but that's it then. Do we do questions?
Yeah, we'll do questions.